I've asked a few people if they'd ever heard of Hermann Ittershagen, and almost every one of them decided that they'd never heard of him. He was a man who was deeply involved in agriculture and aviation in Western Australia in the early days. He doesn't get much of a mention, but you'll be surprised at what I've found out about him. He was born in Germany, came to WA at the age of 28 years. He took over a farm near Manjimup, but it proved to be a little bit much for him. He was running out of money and it was taking a lot of time, and so he decided that he'd try something else. And so he started a wickerwork business in West Subiaco. It was called West Subiaco in those days. It's Shepley Park now. Wickerwork was very popular in those days. There was no plastics, so prams, bassinets. You've heard of the term of wicker basket? Yeah. I've even been called a wicker basket. And many, many houses had wicker furniture in them. He'd served apprenticeship under his uncle in Bremen in Germany and brought some new techniques to Western Australia, which proved that his products were very, very popular. He became an Australian citizen in 1908, and in 1922 he went back to Germany for a holiday. In that year, when he returned to Western Australia, he became the German Consular Agent, which meant that he represented Germany and the German people in Western Australia. In that position, he was invited to a number of top-level functions and got to meet some of the important people in Western Australia. In 1925, he made a study of farm tractors. What in fact had happened when he was in Germany on that trip, he went to the Lanz tractor factory and had a long discussion with Heinrich Lanz. And when he got back to Western Australia, he looked at the possibility of tractor sales. So if you think of the year, there were very, very few tractors on the farms. Farmers were still using teams of horses to tow their equipment around. And so the market was ripe for tractors. And so he imported initially 3 Lanz Bulldog tractors. The engines were 2-stroke. They were easy to operate. They ran on crude oil, which was very, very cheap. But one of the drawbacks was that they had to be heated. The sump of the engine had to be heated with a blowtorch to bring the crude oil up to a temperature where it would vaporise and be ready to be sucked into the engine for firing. That process of heating the engine didn't really affect the farmers because they were spending a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes getting their horses ready every morning. So firing up the tractor was just part of the day. So he formed a company called Crude Oil Tractor Proprietary Limited. And he promoted the tractor by being forward-thinking and going on country tours where with a tractor and a trailer and spare parts and other equipment, he would visit various towns in the farming districts of Western Australia. These visits to the country got bigger and bigger as time went on. In fact, one of these tours was 1,000 miles, where he visited 22 towns. He was a well-known character, used to be seen at some of the sales presentations with his Bulldog tractor, and if you look hard there, you'll be able to see that he's got his Bulldog with him. People used to talk about him. They were already talking about him because when he started his wicker business, it was about a year or two after he started that he won a prize in a raffle, and that was for a horse and sulky. And there were very few cars on the roads in 1910 through to 13, and him in this sulky was something that people talked about because he was often seen carting his furniture from one place to another and to sales outlets. In the mid-1920s, speaking of transport, he also became a popular figure. People were talking about him because he imported a motorised bicycle with a motor over the back wheel and belt driven from the motor to the wheel, and he would pop, 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 pop through Subiaco, waving to people as he went and then waving back to him. Probably the first of that variety of transport in Western Australia. He felt that after a couple of years of tractor sales that he needed to get out to the country a little bit more quickly, and so while he was in Germany he'd seen the Clem aircraft, so he decided that he would import a couple of Clems, and they arrived in Western Australia, the first one and the second one a few months later. It was assembled at Maylands. It was possible to fold the wings, so it was towed by road to West Subiaco, and he had acquired some land in West Subiaco, and this is where he was going to operate the aircraft from. It had a 40 horsepower French engine, a Salmon engine, and it cruised at 80 miles an hour. Both of those figures are a little bit on the low side compared to the aircraft that were operating out of Maylands at the time. They had close to 100 horsepower and cruising at well over 100 mile an hour. I'm talking about the Gypsy type aircraft, the Tavern Gypsy. Of course his aim was to apply the aeroplane to speedy field service for his country customers and to involve his staff in sales. By this stage he had employed well over a dozen people in his wickerworks factory, and he was starting to get people working for him with his aircraft company. And so he got a licence for some land in West Subiaco, and we've talked about that. That's a map of where it was. He took up a 20-year lease, which gave him pretty good hold on the land. And in that map down the bottom, the width from east to west is 750 metres, or yards in those days. And the Nicholson Road subway was where the red dot is, and so people would have to get from the Nicholson Road subway under the railway line and then out to the field. Initially it was only a sand track and people had lots of trouble getting there. So that was the result of the clearing of the land. You can see, if you look hard, two tractors. You can see the aircraft there. And he employed 10 Italians to do the clearing. They lived on site, and he visited them once a week with food and money or pay. They evidently did a pretty good job and worked pretty hard for him. He was very happy with the results. So the airfield was opened in October, the end of 1929. And to give you a rough idea with the current map of where it was, this is Underwood Avenue, that's the old Perry Lake Stadium, and this is the McGillivray Oval area for sporting facilities. That's where the lease existed as an overlay, and later a racetrack was built around it, so we'll talk about the racetrack later on. He established a company called the Aerial Commerce Company, which operated his aerial service, and he employed Harry Cannonball Baker, who was probably the best aviator in Western Australia, one of the best anyway. He was the first commercial pilot trained in Western Australia. He had A, B, C, D and E engineering qualifications for servicing aircraft, and he was also qualified to teach people to fly. So Ittershagen probably couldn't have picked a better person. Baker had worked for the 3 years prior to that at Perth Technical School, where he lectured on all of the subjects to do with aviation. And so that's the first takeoff. As I said, the wings were folded, the aircraft was towed via the sand track to the airfield, and that's the first takeoff in August 1929. Within 10 days, that aircraft and Baker were headed east for the centenary air race. 1829, 1929, the 100th anniversary of Western Australia. It was the longest air race of its type for quite some time. Unfortunately, Baker was disqualified. The aircraft was so slow that the headwind on the first day caused him to arrive late at the first checkpoint, which was at Nil, and he arrived after the checkpoint closed, and so they couldn't get a time for him, and so he was disqualified from the event, but still eligible for leg events on the way. Even though he didn't do any good and was the last aircraft to finish, he received lots of publicity. He also took over the agency for Mercedes-Benz trucks. As I mentioned, Baker and Ittershagen would take off on country tours with a tractor, and at times they would take the Mercedes truck with them. They would also, if they took the Clem aircraft, they would provide joyrides at a price and make money as things went. While they were in the country, they encouraged farmers to prepare landing grounds so that the Clem could reach many more people, and in fact be in a position to service the tractors that had been sold. So you can see that his pioneering efforts were pretty much original, venturing into areas which had not been touched before. The tractors came with rubber tyres, but not always were they suited to the type of land, and so he had constructed a set of different wheels with different lugs and different widths. The wheels on the right there with the multiple lugs were 18 inches wide. So that was the scene at the opening of the West Phoebe airport, and he very quickly built a hangar there for the Clems. By this time the second Clem had arrived. Amy Johnson arrived in Western Australia, and we talked about that some months ago, mid 1930. She was supposed to fly in. Harry Baker was going to fly from Maylands to West Subiac Aerodrome on the Saturday, but the weather was so bad she had to travel by road. When she did, she was welcomed by the Mayor of Subiaco. She entered the stage area after passing through an archway. The archway was made of wickerwork, it was painted white, and it was a product of Hermann Ittershagen. So as well as his airport, he was advertising his gear in front of the crowd there. He put a lot of money into country field days, etc. You can see that there's an ad for the Lands Bulldog there and the Clem aircraft there, and probably in the paddock in the background the aircraft would have landed, and it would have been available for joyrides for the people at the field day. Also, the tractor would be doing demonstrations for prospective buyers, and of course the diesel truck only came as a chassis, so you had to build your own cab and tray for it. He wasn't scared to advertise. When the second Clem arrived, he had it suspended from the roof in Fliers in Perth. He was already on good terms with Fliers because they and Bones were outlets for his wickerwork products. When the second Clem arrived, there was a set of floats that came with it, and so the floats were attached to the first Clem, registered The attachment took place at Netherlands. There's Harry Baker making the first takeoff on the Swan River, mid-January 1930. It only took him 2 days to get to Rottnest, and so he was the first aircraft to get to Rottnest. This impressed the people on the island who wanted to fly back to Perth, or people who wanted to get over to the island in a hurry. It became so popular that the aircraft was taken away from its primary role as travelling to country centres and was involved at weekends in joyrides at Guinea Pop. It was so popular that the Rottnest Island Board decided that they should have an airfield there. Of course, this worked against the basic aim of Ittershagen, because this airfield, if it was built, would attract all of the aircraft, there are plenty of them, that were mainlands. So his success by going to the island was countered by an airfield being built over there. He spread the aircraft around a lot by travelling to Mandurah and doing joyrides down there. He even suggested that he would import a suitable aircraft and open an air route between Perth and Albany. He also encouraged people in country towns to build airfields so that he could run the business from Perth to Albany, and he'd be able to service his tractors and create sales if those airports or airfields were prepared. There was opposition to the floatplane. The residents of Netherlands felt that the aircraft operating on the river was going to create noise at weekends, and it could be a danger to the young children who were attracted to it. The river operation was terminated, and you could see in this that for every move forward that Ittershagen made, there was a backward step where, due to his thinking or response from other people, he had to step back. He felt that he could better use his airfield if he started the Subiaco Flying Club, and it turned out to be very popular. He ended up with 160 members in about 18 months, and they promoted it very, very well, with Father Christmas arriving each year and all sorts of events. And of course, there were field days at the airfield. At the same time, Charles Snook, who we've heard about, was doing the same thing in promoting country areas and trying to build up a business with Wings Limited. At about the same time, Harry Baker left Ittershagen to start his own business. And so there were now 3 businesses, Ittershagen, Snook and Baker, all trying to service the same market, and things got tighter and tighter as they went. And if you look in the top corner of that slide, 1930, what happened in 1930? It was getting towards the Great Depression, where people were running out of money. So things were getting a bit tight, and particularly tight for 3 companies or organisations trying to do the same thing. So the effects of the Depression caused the price of farm products to fall, and farmers didn't have any spare money to put into tractors, etc. So both of Ittershagen's companies, as well as the others, were under pressure. The Clems were prone to damage because they had a tail skid instead of a tail wheel, and that would pull up stumps and sticks, etc., in paddocks and damage the tail of the aircraft. Spare parts weren't readily available, and so at times it took weeks and months to repair the aircraft. Throughout this, the government declared that the carrying of passengers in an aircraft had to be an aircraft with an engine that had dual ignition. The Clems didn't have dual ignition, so there was a delay while the engines were changed to dual ignition, another setback which he hadn't taken into account. Tractors that had been sold on credit had become a problem, and so the world was turning against Mr. west of Ittershagen. And all aerial enterprises without a government subsidy were in trouble. If you remember, Norman Brearley in his company received massive injections of money from the government to fly the service between Geraldton and Derby, and eventually from Maylands to Derby and on after that, and to the eastern states. He started that in 1928, I think. The Aero Club, the forerunner of this club, got its first 2 aircraft for free from the government, so Ittershagen had to buy his aircraft and his opposition didn't have to buy theirs. And as well, the Aero Club got a grant of £40 for every licence issued. So this meant that as quick as they were training people, they were getting more money in the bank. Whereas this wasn't happening for the Subiaco Flying Club. As well, Ittershagen had to deal with the upkeep of West Subiaco, whereas the federal government was looking after the upkeep of Maylands Aerodrome. I've read where in 4 years, from 1926 to 1930 or just after, they injected £50,000 into a levy around Maylands Aerodrome, the dewatering of the aerodrome, etc., and a permanent crew of people to look after the aerodrome, Maylands Aerodrome. Of course, Ittershagen had to look after his own aerodrome. So he opened it up to gliding. The gliders took to the area very quickly, and it was quite a success. They had an aerial pageant, a gliding display in 1931, and it attracted 4,000 people. They all had to arrive via the sand track because there was no sealed road to the aerodrome. And so Ittershagen had to spend a fair bit of time with the Subiaco Shire getting them to seal the road, which they eventually did. Ittershagen believed that gliding was a stepping stone to powered flight, and therefore people that took up gliding would gravitate into powered aviation. And so the banner over the hangar changed from what it was to the WA Flying Club, which was really the gliding. Ittershagen was approached by a group of people who called themselves Brooklands WA Proprietary Limited, and they said, why don't you build a racetrack around your airfield? And so between the Brooklands company and Ittershagen, they put 3,000 tonnes of limestone into the circuit which they built. You can see his hangar there in the bottom corner, and so there were bigger and better displays to come. At these events you would have gliding, crazy flying, formation flying, balloon bursting, aerobatics, air races, model aircraft, etc. There were whippet races, that was dog racing, there were foot races, etc. Jimmy Rees was jumping out of an aircraft flown by Charlie Snook, and he'd got to the stage where he was doing 1,000-foot free fall before he opened the parachute. So this was a draw card. The crowd was always looking for thrills and spills. Cars, motorbikes, powerful cars, motorbikes. Ittershagen decided to change the name of the airport to Brooklands Airport. That was the case in 1932, mid-1932. You can see that he was a busy man, always doing something new, something different. But at one of the shows, a pilot flew the climb very, very low over the crowd of officials and rolled the aircraft. The downgoing wing was so close to the ground that it hit 2 people. One of them was the manager of Brooklands WA. He was badly injured. And so, as a result of that, Brooklands withdrew their support for the airfield. And so, it was around about that time that Snook was in problems, and the aircraft that he had was a Simmons Spartan, and he said to Ittershagen, "You can have this aircraft. I don't have any use for it." So Ittershagen took it over and registered in his wife's name, but couldn't find much work for it, and it was put into the hangar with the two claim aircraft. The photo there has two people standing in front of it, Joe Hancock and Percy Conway. If time permits, I might tell you a quick story about them. Ittershagen took another holiday to Germany, and while he was there, he fell in love with Germany again, came home and extolled the virtues of Germany. And of course, if you remember, 1933 was a time when Hitler was coming to the top. Ittershagen came home from his trip and said that he'd read My Trial, he called it My Trial, which was Mein Kampf, and said that the German people were doing the right thing. This attracted criticism from a whole heap of people, none the least from Rabbi Friedman. They had stand-up arguments and letters to the editor where each was criticising the other. Mr. Ittershagen was getting some bad press. The Clems and the Spartan were pushed into the hangar at West Subi because he wasn't generating any work for them, and the Vandals got in and started to damage the aircraft. In 1934, Lands withdrew their agency, and so he was without a tractor. I don't know what the background of that was, but that was the case. And so Joe Hancock suggested that there was a good tractor available in Europe that was called the Steel Horse. Does anyone remember the name Steel Horse? I certainly heard about it. A few hands go up there. It was a very popular tractor because Ittershagen sold about 50 of them in the next 2 years. And by the end of 1935, Ittershagen's company ceased trading. In 1938, he abandoned the idea of having an aerodrome, and of course 1940 saw the start of World War II, and the government decided that the airport should be torn up in case enemy aircraft were going to land on it. And so Ittershagen, a disappointed man for many, many reasons, passed away as a disappointed person. While, just incidentally, while West Subiaco was dug up, so was the Esplanade in Perth. And you can see there that that's the area where Norman Bradley started his ventures into aviation. West Subiaco Airport, once it was dug up, became ideal for motorbike scrambles. So the Harley Davidson Motorcycle Club made a track out of it, and maybe some of you can remember a bloke called George Scott. I certainly can. I went there a couple of times and saw him. It was very impressive. Quite a man. In fact, I went to a talk by him at North Perth Town Hall. So very quickly I'll tell you an aside story. I showed you that photo earlier on, Joe Hancock, Percy Conway. In about 1985 I was doing some work on my family history. Percy Conway was my uncle by marriage, and his wife was my auntie, and they'd given away their farm at Wongan Hills and retired to Mandurah. So I went down to Mandurah to talk to my auntie about family history. So we chatted over the kitchen table for a couple of hours, and then she went off and was making a cup of tea or something like that. So Percy said to me, "Now you're interested in aeroplanes, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I could tell you a bit of a story about that." I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, at the age of 14, he left school, wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do, and his push bike rides had taken him past the Ittershagen factory. So he dropped in and asked for a job, and he got a job and became a wickerwork apprentice. He worked as an apprentice for 2 years, and then Ittershagen got the tractors. So he changed and became a tractor apprentice. When he finished his apprenticeship, he was a very lucky man in that he was able to put pretty well everything he earned into the bank. And so he bought a tractor from Ittershagen, a bulldog, a Land's bulldog. While Ittershagen was doing these country tours that I talked about, Percy sometimes went with him, and he had an idea of what was good farming district and what was poor. He'd already decided that Wongan Hills was a good area. So in his brand new tractor with a cut lunch and water bag, he set off for Wongan Hills. And when he got there, he said, well, I'm interested in becoming a share farmer. Anyone interested? My contribution will be the tractor. So an Irishman stepped forward and said, yeah, you can have half my farm. Let's get into it. So after 2 years, the Irishman, who was in dreadful debt, decided that he wasn't making any progress. So he said to Percy, listen, you can have my share for a song. So Percy became a farmer with his tractor, one of the few people in the district with a tractor. When I was a kid, 10, 11 and 12, I often went to the farm and the tractor was there. And I remember the blowtorch coming out and going underneath the engine while it was being warmed for 10 or 20 minutes, and then it would start by twisting an outside cog or wheel, and it would start and go pop, 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 and the RPM at idle was maybe 500, and when it was working hard, probably 1,000 RPM. Percy had already bought other tractors, but he held on to the Bulldog. The other bloke, Joe Hancock, joined Ittershagen at the time when he was taking on Percy as an apprentice. So Hancock and Percy worked their apprenticeship together and became firm friends, lifelong friends. I'd actually been in the company of Joe Hancock on many occasions, but knew nothing of the background of either of these men. When Ittershagen was going bad, Joe Hancock stayed with him. He changed from tractors to aircraft mechanic. He also was the man who actually introduced Ittershagen to the steel horse tractor. So he had that association. And so he stayed with Ittershagen until he passed away, and then went on to do other things. After my discussion with Percy, I contacted Joe Hancock and asked if I could come round and talk to him, but his wife told me that he wasn't very well and it wouldn't be possible. So I missed out on a bit of history there. Anyway, that was an aside which came my way, which I was very happy to be involved in. And so that brings us to the end. So thank you very much.